Good evening. I'm Mary Huson Callan. I'm president of the League of Women Voters of Rochester, and I welcome you this evening to our forum with the Rochester Regional Attorney General's Office. The League is a nonpartisan political organization which encourages the informed and active participation of citizens in government. We influence public policy through education and advocacy, and we focus significant effort on registering new voters. In the last election season, we actually were 5,000 worth, us and our affiliates, of the 42,000 new voters who were registered in Monroe County, so we make a significant contribution. We are not for women only. We encourage men to join us in making democracy work. And on behalf of all of the members of the Rochester League, I welcome you to this forum exploring the services and the resources of the Rochester Regional Office of the New York State Attorney General. We're so pleased to present Ted O'Brien, who is, I'm sure, familiar to everybody here, and Assistant AG Ben Bruce from the Rochester office. Please join me in welcoming Ted O'Brien and Ben Bruce.
Yes, my position is I'm the Assistant Attorney General in charge of the Rochester Regional Office. And prior to that, I was an attorney in private practice for about 30 years and did a stint in the county legislature that I know some of you from, and a stint in the state legislature and state senate for a little bit, and finally found the job that I really love. But with me tonight is Ben Bruce, who also has quite a background. He started out in the public defender's office, worked, or maybe before that at the county attorney's office, was in private practice, was in-house counsel for a corporation, and for the last 15 years has been in the Attorney General's office in just about every role that we have in our regional office. The regional office down at the Court and Exchange building is staffed by 10 attorneys. And most of what we do is defensive work, where we're defending the state or state agency, like the Department of Motor Vehicles or DEC or Department of Transportation or Department of Corrections and Litigation. It's mostly trial lawyers. And Ben is going to talk a lot about what kind of the public face and the work we do on behalf of the people of the state of New York in addition to that. But I also want to give you a little sense for the breadth and the resources available to us. Mary was saying that she didn't know there was a Rochester Regional Office in the Attorney General's office, so we said, well, let's get out and talk about what we do, because there are 650 attorneys that work for the Attorney General's office, and total employees of like 1,700, including forensic accountants and scientists and staff support and attorneys, and it's one of the largest law firms in the world, probably. Ben probably knows better than I, but and we have great capacity. And towards that end, although we have just absolutely tremendous attorneys in the Rochester office, some of the very best litigators, we have a really strong office who fortunately have welcomed me with open arms, and that's been good. But even the work that we don't specifically do, there are a lot of things that are available to us. And one of the things that spurred tonight's gathering was a meeting, a roundtable discussion with the head of our Civil Rights Bureau that came to Rochester and met with the heads of a number of different organizations to talk about the works. But we have 5 different divisions in the Attorney General's office, including, it's probably, some of it may be in information in your handouts, but there's an appeals bureau that handles our appeals, but there's a criminal justice bureau, including criminal enforcement and financial crimes bureau. And one of the local illustrations of that was prosecution done actually by an AAG out of Syracuse involving the local development corporations, or LDCs, in a bid rigging scandal that was fairly prominent in the news here. So we do some criminal work, although not out of our regional office. We can handle it, and people will come in if circumstances demand. We have a number of other criminal justice bureaus, including an organized crime task force that does have a presence in Rochester. We have investigators and an attorney that works with that. There's a Medicaid fraud control unit, which isn't technically, we don't count it as part of our regional office. There's a number of other attorneys in the same building on a different floor cracking down on Medicaid fraud. And then there's a Public Integrity Bureau too. And we do get, sadly maybe, a number of calls about public integrity issues where people believe that public officials are not acting in the best interest of the public and maybe have done things that would cause for an investigation. A lot of the work we do is out of a division called the State Counsel, and that is a claims bureau. The claims attorneys in our office do work in the court of claims, and that's when somebody is suing the state or a state agency just for money damages only. So a lot of times it's automobile accidents where the Department of Transportation is being sued because an alleged design defect or failure to maintain appropriately or something like that. Those are the claims attorneys. And the Litigation Bureau, we do a lot of work in federal court, even though we're state attorney generals. If somebody is insisting that the state is violating their constitutional rights, we do a lot of constitutional work in our office. More interesting, perhaps, for the reasons that we're here tonight to talk to all of you, is the social justice and economic justice divisions. We have a presence in our office of a member of the Charities Bureau, and that's actually some significant and rather specialized work. One of the things that's been very notable across the nation is the Charities Bureau's investigation of something called the Trump Foundation. You may have heard of it, and it's kind of unclear in my mind where that is headed now. But the Charities Bureau does a lot of different things involved with filing requirements for charities, regulations and annual filings for not-for-profits, registration requirements, the database on fundraisers that we have available to people, and there is a charities complaint page on the website, which, by the way, is www.ag.ny.gov. And if you have complaints about charities or believe that they're being mismanaged or somehow not fulfilling the mission of the not-for-profit or the charity, there's a way to complain about that online, or the phone numbers on the webpage as well. We also have a labor bureau. The Labor Bureau investigates violations alleged in the workplace of minimum wage or prevailing wage laws or overtime laws, basic labor laws. The Attorney General enforces, and they also enforce right-to-know laws concerning toxins in the workplace. There's right-to-know legislation. If it's not being complied with by an employer, there's right-to-know legislation that we enforce. And so any kind of violation of workplace rights, there is again a complaint form. You can go to the website and file complaints if you believe there's complaints in the employment place, the workplace. The Civil Rights Bureau is very active. Protects against discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, age, marital status, sexual orientation, gender, identification, military status, source of income, or disability. And we, just as an example of something recently, the Civil Rights Bureau came and met with officials in the city of Rochester. And we talk about source of income discrimination. What's that? Well, that's a housing issue. And the city of Rochester City Council is considering taking up source of income legislation that would prohibit a landlord from discriminating against somebody if they're, for example, Section 8 housing income recipient. And a lot of landlords believe that there's too much potential for problem tenants, and it's discriminatory, and people are not able to lease an apartment because of where their income is coming from. And if a local municipality, there's not a statewide legislation for us to enforce in that regard, but if a local municipality passes its own anti-income discrimination, use of income, source of income legislation, then we will enforce that legislation on behalf of the municipality. That's kind of important to know. And we enforce disability rights as well. If you believe that there is an instance where there's civil rights protections that are being violated, the website is there. Rather than calling the regional office, you can always call the regional office. But you can go to the website and file a complaint there and indicate where it is, and it may very likely get referred to us initially. And we'll determine if attorneys should be involved from New York or Albany or elsewhere. There are some other bureaus in the Social Justice Bureau, Tobacco Compliance, Environmental Protection Bureau, very involved in spill recovery, and a fairly active bureau. And there's a Healthcare Bureau. Under the Economic Justice Division, there's an Antitrust Bureau. There's also something called the Bureau of Internet and Technology. And everything else, they have a cute little acronym, I think, for people that understand computers called BIT. And I know there's something called a BIT, I'm not quite sure what it is. But our Bureau of Internet and Technology is kind of interesting. It includes a Columbia law professor named Tim Wu, who was famous for a couple of reasons. One, he's allegedly had coined the phrase net neutrality that we hear an awful lot about. And he also got something of a public persona. He was Zephyr Teachout's running mate in the Democratic primary for governor a couple of years ago. Tim Wu was part of the Bureau of Internet and Technology at our office. And that's significant because that bureau protects consumers from online threats, which can take place in a number of different ways. They're looking at deceptive trade practices, consumer fraud, spyware misuse, also protecting free speech. And that bureau will, in some instances, mediate disputes between consumers and online sellers. So you can get a sense of the comprehensive nature of what our office does. And I've talked about a lot of things that we do on the defense side and a lot of things that different bureaus did. But it was very important that Ben come and be here with us tonight, because kind of our public face is really in what we call not defensive but affirmative cases. And that's where we are thinking that somebody is perpetuating a fraud on the public at large. And it can be everything from very local issues. The common one is the snowplow driver who flyers entire neighborhoods, goes around and picks up money and customers from everybody, and then never shows up when the snow is flying. We don't stand in the place of someone's individual attorney, but if we believe that it's comprehensive such that it really constitutes perpetuating a fraud on the public, we will intervene. Local contractors is a lot of it. But sometimes people have disputes with credit card companies or travel agencies. Right? That's probably a bad example because we're going after one right now. But in any event, we do offer some mediation services too. But to talk really about this whole affirmative side, and I wanted to tell you one other thing about Ben, because while he does a lot of the local issues, Ben has had cases that he's done out of our little Rochester office that have national implications. He's gone after Walmart and Amazon quite successfully. He's literally changed the banking industry and high-cost loans by going after the banking industry. He has gone forward and gotten retailers of toy guns to comply so they don't look like real guns because of the potential for disastrous results that can happen when kids are running around with guns that look like real guns and end up getting shot, and has had an enormous impact not only on our local region, but really brought cases of national implication. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Ben. We didn't prepare our marks very well. I probably just said everything that Ben was going to say. So I apologize.
Thank you, Ted. I can usually come up with one or two things that we can talk about. First I want to say thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting us this evening. The whole concept of having a user's guide to government and learning about what government offices do and what services we offer and where to go for help is of critical importance in today's world, because there is a plethora of information out there, and so even though learning the right place might be out there, you just don't know how to get to that information. So we hope to spend some time this evening to make it a little bit easier for you. And what I hope to do is to give you some examples of cases that we have handled here, and often in conjunction with several of the different bureaus that Ted has just talked about, which is what gives us the ability to have local, statewide, national, and sometimes international results from cases that come right from our local community. And it is the relationship between the regional offices and the other offices within the Attorney General's office that give us access to the resources and the expertise that we need to make a difference in a world that is growing increasingly more complex. So what I want to do is give you some examples from each of the bureaus that Ted has talked about. And I'm going to start with criminal justice and tell you a little bit about the Attorney General's role in criminal justice. The Attorney General does not have primary criminal justice jurisdiction. What I mean by that is your primary criminal law enforcement officer is who? It's the district attorney. And the 62 district attorneys in New York State handle cases of criminal nature. And the Attorney General has some direct, specific jurisdiction to go into criminal areas. Medicaid fraud is one of those areas. Our Medicaid fraud unit that we have in our Rochester office handles a number of cases every year where individuals are involved in fraudulent billing, whether it is a hospital or a doctor or other healthcare service provider, or whether they are patients that act in collusion with healthcare providers for the purpose of defrauding Medicaid. If you hear about or you know about those kinds of problems, come to us. We can deal with those problems. We have the jurisdiction and we're set up to do it with the resources. One of the things that I think we ought to talk about is investigators. We have an investigative division that provides us some of the best investigators in the country that help to support the investigations and litigation that we're involved in on a daily basis on behalf of the people of the state of New York. And the Medicaid Bureau also has investigators, auditors, forensic people who take evidence to help manage the fraud issues that they deal with. The Taxpayer Protection Bureau is an area that Attorney General Schneiderman has focused on and brought resources into so that taxpayer money doesn't get lost. New York is one of the states in the country, like the federal government, that has a False Claims Act. The False Claims Act allows citizens and oftentimes insiders who work for the government or with the government to provide information about fraud that's happening, where there are false claims that are being filed in the way of vendors who overcharge the government, or false claims where vendors who may have to pay a fee for services don't pay those fees. Locally, you saw some part of this in Adam Bellows' campaign where he talked about the $35,000 in fees that didn't get charged. That kind of information is a type of information that we can act on behalf of the taxpayers to save money for the taxpayers, to be sure that the fees that are supposed to be collected by government do get collected by government, to lower the tax burden on you and I, the taxpayers. The Organized Crime Task Force has been a particular jewel in the criminal justice section of our office, because the Attorney General has the unique opportunity to deal with crimes that cross county lines. Organized crime in particular, whether it is racketeering, whether it is drugs or gangs, they don't respect boundaries, political boundaries. They commit crime wherever they see fit, and sometimes they do it over county lines, hoping that they won't get detected. The Organized Crime Task Force allows state and local agencies to work together to identify those kinds of criminal enterprises and to bring them to justice in a way that individual district attorneys' offices may not be able to because of evidence that may fall in a number of different jurisdictions or may involve different law enforcement agencies at different levels of government. But the Attorney General's office is able to work with state and local law enforcement agencies to handle those cross-county criminal activity. On the affirmative side, the Attorney General has the unique position of being a regulator as well as a law enforcement officer in some very important areas. One of those areas is the Charities Bureau. And the Charities Bureau actually even has its own separate website. In addition to the Attorney General's website, ag.ny.gov, the Charities Bureau has a website. It is charitiesUS.com. And on that website, they have complaint forms where you can provide a complaint about charities' activities. You see, the Attorney General regulates charities and requires them to register if they're going to do fundraising in New York, if they're going to hire a professional fundraiser or a solicitor to do fundraising for them. And each year, the Charities Department publishes a report. It's called Pennies for Charity. And it is a report that details the spending by charities on fundraising versus the money that they spend on their operations, so that you can actually see where your money goes. If you have information about a charity that is squandering its money or is being deceptive or fraudulent in the way that it is fundraising and soliciting funds, come to us. You can fill out a form online, you can come into the office and come talk to us about it. I have handled charities fraud cases that have, in some instances, required that we shut down professional fundraisers. We had a situation where the fundraiser was keeping 80% of the money and only 20% of the money was actually going to the charity. We had the same professional fundraiser raising funds for sound-alike charities. So instead of the, it may have been the Association for Missing and Exploited Children, it was the Association for Missing Youth. So that it was close but not exactly the same. And they don't do the same work and they don't provide the same results. And people didn't realize that they weren't giving to the charity that they thought they were giving to. So we were able to get an injunction in court, shut the company down, get a $50,000 fine against them, and a permanent injunction against those individuals from opening up charities' activities again in New York State. And that was here in Rochester. The Civil Rights Bureau is a very special bureau for those of us who are fortunate enough to live and work here in New York. We know that civil rights and diversity is something that we have a premium on, that we protect and we guard with our last breath. But we have had cases here in Rochester that have involved businesses that have set up surveillance in dressing rooms for their employees without telling them about it. And that's a violation of your civil rights. And we were able to bring that company in and get an injunction to prevent them from continuing to do that. that, and they paid a fine, and they removed the cameras from those dressing rooms. It's a matter of personal dignity, and in some instances, it's just our office that's available and able to protect that. The Environmental Protection Bureau has had a number of matters that affect us in upstate New York. So often we hear about pollution matters, brownfields, and cleanup issues. But the Environmental Protection Bureau has also been involved in toxics in consumer products. Most recently, you may have heard about the Attorney General's efforts in relation to microbeads. Microbeads are small plastic items that can be found in products like toothpaste, for example, that create all kinds of environmental hazards. And the Attorney General's Environmental Protection Bureau was instrumental in getting several major companies to cut back and to end the use of microbeads in their products. Locally, we had one of the largest distributors of lunch boxes for children brought into our investigation because products that we tested came back positive for lead. And the children's lunch boxes had a lead level that was so high that they could not be disposed of in a landfill without having hazardous waste protocols involved. Our lawsuit led to a permanent injunction against the company that was bringing those products in from China, and they were also recalled at Walmart, Target, Sears, JCPenney's across the country. And that was a matter that we did out of our office with help from the Environmental Protection Bureau and the use of their scientists and their investigators so that we could test the material, confirm the results, and use that to persuade the retailers to prevent the importer from bringing that kind of product into the United States. And that was out of Rochester. Consumer Protection Bureau and frauds is probably an area that you most frequently associate with the Attorney General. And it certainly is an area that is very busy. We take about 10,000 pieces of mail in a year in the Rochester area for consumer frauds. We have a mediation process where if you as an individual have a complaint against a business, maybe it's a refund that you're owed, maybe it's a warranty that's not taken care of, maybe it's a product that just doesn't work, maybe it's a question of false or deceptive advertising, and you have a particular problem with a business, you can come to us and we can mediate that problem. We send a copy of your complaint to the business and we ask the business to address your complaint. And quite often that's all it takes to resolve that one complaint. But in those instances where a business is involved in repeated or persistent fraud or illegality, then the people of the state of New York are affected by that. While we can't represent one individual, we can when the problem is systemic and it involves a number of people. And this is often the case in false advertising matters. And so we've been able to bring cases against companies of all sizes to get them to change the way that they do business or to offer refunds. We've had car dealers, for example, who have not paid off a lien on a car and then turned around and sold the car with the lien still in place to a third person, only for that person to discover that the bank now wants the lien to be paid, and if it's not paid, they're going to repossess the vehicle. It was a dealership here in Rochester. We were able to close the dealership down, get a court order, turning over all of its assets to the state of New York. We were able to then go retrieve the cars from all of the different places where they were, get them back to the original owners, and get title restored. And money for those people who had lost their cash. That's the kind of work that we do in consumer frauds. Another matter that Ted mentioned is actually a mixed matter of consumer frauds and civil rights. Was one of the first cases of that major case that I worked on when I came to the office. It was against a bank that was involved in predatory lending with interest rates as high as 24.9% on homes. And individuals who had the occasion to pay up to 5 or 6 or 7 points. And this particular bank was doing this across the country. We saw a number of these complaints here in the Rochester office first. We then had all the complaints from across the state brought here. We had over 200. We sat down and we talked to people, and we got investigators involved, and it led to a $500 million settlement against the bank. And it resulted in changing the way that the business operated so that it could not charge unlimited points on loans, so that it could not have piggyback loans, more than one loan on a particular property, where people were unable to take care of their loans. There were 300,000 people across the country that received relief on their loans as a result of that lawsuit that started here in Rochester. That was one of those ones. I spent about 2 years on that particular litigation, and most of the time we were in Chicago. And after a while, my children would say, "When are you going to your office in Chicago?" And I said, "We don't have an office in Chicago." But that's where the bank was headquartered. But it was something that someone just simply brought to us. These things all start with a single complaint. And so we think that it is so important for the League of Women Voters and other associations and organizations to know about what we do so that you can get the word out, not just for yourself, or for those organizations that you belong to and communities that you live in, so that those needs can be taken care of. One of the other areas in economic justice is an Investor Protection Bureau. So many people put their life savings into investments, and we try very hard to plan and to investigate companies and to do the right thing when we make investments. But when a company is involved in fraud and soliciting funds, they can violate the Martin Act. In New York, we have a law that says you cannot engage in fraud to solicit people to invest in a company. And we had a company here that I had the job of prosecuting a few years ago, where it started off as a very small business, and an individual with a lot of ingenuity and some engineering know-how who developed a product, got it patented, began to test it, but then didn't have really the business acumen to bring the product to market. And so, as opposed to sort of